Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast where us four backlog boys are trying to figure out what the very best picture winner of all time is. We're doing it in random order thanks to our good friend, the god of random chance, otherwise known as the Wheel. I think we'll be visiting him towards the end of the episode. But today we are talking about The Shape of Water, fairly recent film from 2017, directed by Guillermo del Toro, starring Sally Hawkins, Octavia Spencer, Michael Shannon, and an interesting film. I'm gonna say it, an interesting film. There's something in there. There's more to discover about this film. I want to talk about it with all of you guys. But first, we need to revisit what happened last week, because last week we made our triumphant return in episode 60 for season 3 of Quest for the Bestest. And we talked about Patton from 1970. We gave it an average score of 5.7. We're a little confused about the film, thought it was weird in some ways and cool in other ways, and generally conflicted. So if you want to figure out more in detail about what we thought about it, I recommend checking out that episode. It's available everywhere, truly everywhere. It's on YouTube.
Everywhere podcasts are sold.
Look out your window. It'll be there.
It'll be there. You'll see our shining faces talking about...
You can't hide from the Patton episode.
That is absolutely correct. But before we dive in, we're really going to dive into this one. We're going to dive into that pool of water that is so frequently featured in this film. I want to hear from Abram, who I believe has our featured comment from last week.
I do. We have a featured comment on the Patton episode from our newly adopted son, Dan's, who has often been edged out by John Tour for featured comment, even though Dan's been trying, but he hit a real zinger here this week, so good that it got our creator heart, and he writes... I was 14 back when
I
this
give
came
almost
out.
every comment the creator heart, by the way.
Oh, that shows how many comment sections I check.
Yeah, well.
But Dan writes, I was 14 when this came out and did not see it. I wasn't really into war movies. If I remember correctly, there were some issues with anti-war groups that this was a pro-war/war-mongering movie. When I did see it, sometime shortly after on VHS, much like you all, I thought it was a good movie, but not great. I did think George C. Scott was a good choice for Best Actor. Him and Jerry Goldsmith's score are the two best parts of the film. I never thought of it as an anti-Patton film, but I can see how it could be interpreted that way. Don't worry about the old people who discount your opinions because you are young. Your opinions are awesome to hear. I think it's great to see young people discover old movies, good and bad. Those old people were young ones in the films they were watching back in the day and loving, probably thought the films from 50 years before were not great. It is a cycle.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is. And that's one thing I always resign myself to is like, hey, if people are saying, shut up, you're young, you shouldn't talk about films, like, well, I'm going to be saying that to someone else in 50 years, and someone was saying that to you 50 years ago, so.
That's why I always say that the only good film is Arrival of a Train at a Station.
Sure.
Yeah.
There were no film critics when it came out.
Precisely.
To be fair, the people who were watching Patton saying the movies from previous years sucked were right. It happened one night. Broadway melody.
Well.
We certainly had our fair share of stinkers from the years before Patton. But, that's just how it goes. Enough talk about all these old movies. Let's talk about a new movie. How about one that is all fresh in our minds, not only because we recently watched it, but it didn't come out that long ago. The Shape of Water. What is The Shape of Water? What do you guys think about that?
The Shape of Water is something. I think they sort of try to describe it in the ending narration of this film. It's something that it fills up space more than takes on a physical form.
Timo just really hit us with the what's the desert power ranking question for this episode. And I don't really know where to take it, but you know what? I'm gonna actually just Timo. I apologize, but I'm just going to go right into my thoughts on the film.
That's what I wanted to do anyway.
I think that's what his intention,
You kind of got it.
You know what? It's fine. Here's the deal about The Shape of Water, right? I am what you might refer to as an average GDT beginner, because I'd only seen Pacific Rim when this film came out.
Sure.
You only knew him as an action director.
I mean, frankly, that's probably how we all really
probably
were at the time it came out, yeah.
But so watching Shape of Water, I was pretty impressed by it. I enjoyed it a lot when it came out and won Best Picture. But I hadn't revisited it at all until 4 hours ago when I rewatched the movie in time for Quest. And I really like this movie a lot. I feel like it lowered my estimation on a second watch because here's the deal about Shape of Water. For the first Basically, up until the last 20 minutes of the film, I think it is a really cozy film. I love the aesthetic. This score is one of my favorite, probably my favorite non-John Williams scores of all time. I love the music. I think it adds so much to the film. There's just a warmth to the cinematography and the characters and the entire ambiance. But I think that there's a real tonal inconsistency when it ends up turning into Michael Shannon's like tyrannical quest to retrieve the asset. I think that the violence and the tone just feels like a disjunction for me that I can't quite get over, to be totally honest with you.
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that Michael Shannon's tyrannical quest to obtain the asset is going to be the new name for Quest for the Bestest. We like to keep a little consistency here, so we're keeping Quest in there.
Sure.
But Abram, I'll go into my thoughts next. Like I said, when we rolled this film last week, I haven't seen this since early 2018 when I think I watched it after it won Best Picture. But going back to it, still just as good. I really, really enjoyed The Shape of Water. I think it is such an interesting film to be locked in. You know, eventually it will be in the middle of the Best Picture winners, but right now it's semi-recent. But I think it is such an interesting one to be...
You're right. 70 years from now, it'll be in the middle of the time scale.
I'd appreciate if you don't comment upon the things that
and guess
I
what?
say.
300 years from now, it'll be near the beginning.
Tucker, be like how Michael Shannon wishes the women in his life were.
Yeah, silent. Be quiet, my good man. Because as I was saying, I really, really enjoy The Shape of Water. I think it is like Abram said. I think I really like the aesthetic of this film. The score is obviously fantastic. Sally Hawkins is great as our mute protagonist. The special effects are all fantastic, practical and otherwise. I think. Yeah, what I was really getting to before I was so rudely interrupted was that it is so interesting that this is the aesthetic and like type of film that won Best Picture this year. When Tucker and I were talking about this, Dunkirk could just have had one, or The Darkest Hour, or what have you.
Yeah.
Well, Dunkirk's not a very good movie.
Well, yeah. Well, I agree to a certain extent, and I certainly agree that this is a much better film to win Best Picture and a much more interesting film to win Best Picture, because this is one of my favorite Best Picture winners, because 7,000 Ways from Sunday, this does not feel like a Best Picture winner. From the way the story is shaped out to sort of be a monster movie, to the fact that we're focusing on a mute protagonist, to a strange aesthetic and a more reflective score and a more focused artistic vision coming from Guillermo del Toro, it does not feel in any way like what you would expect the Academy Awards to vote for. But I think that makes it stand out very strongly, which is why, personally, it rockets very quickly to the top of my favorite Best Picture list. But also, this is, I just think, is a quality film all around. I think maybe my first time watching it, I didn't quite pick up on the nuances in the characters, or how Guillermo del Toro was trying to subvert expectations of monster movies and love stories and all this stuff, which are very clearly in the film now that I've analyzed it better. But when you mention the aesthetic and you mention the score, and my mind is just instantly transported to that Alexander Desplat music and the underwater imagery, and just instantly... it's cinema magic to me, and that's why I think this film works so well. It has such a wonder to it. And while you're right, Abram, there is a tonal inconsistency as we shift into semi-action movie for like the closing moments of the film. Yeah. I do think that there is a dread building throughout the movie to where that doesn't feel too out of place to me. Like you know that's coming. You can see it in Michael Shannon's eyes. You can see it as the clock starts ticking down to having to return the asset to the water. And so when it hits that, I'm like, yeah, of course that's going to happen. It has to come to a head at some point. So yes, this is one of my favorite movies we've seen.
Yeah, I think that when we look at all these Best Pictures and when we think about like what is the genre that a Best Picture winner like is, this is a genre film. It's a monster sci-fi. It's a historical piece, which we get sometimes. Often wins Best Picture films. But this is, like you said, Tucker, very far outside of what we would have normally expected from a Best Picture winner. It's not like a family drama. It certainly isn't anything like any of the war movies we've seen. And so just, I think from the novelty aspect of it, there's a lot there to think about. as a Best Picture winner. And as a film, Tucker, I agree with your use of the word quality. I think this is a really quality film, meaning that just like the sets, the acting, like all the technical aspects, it's beautifully shot. Sound design, I think, is really good. It's really interesting. Of course, you get more opportunities to do cool stuff with things like that, given that there's a monster that makes weird noises that we're not used to hearing. So there's,
Yeah.
the film
Speak for yourself.
it lets itself kind of play with some of these more creative elements. But I do kind of find myself just enjoying it on a surface level. It doesn't necessarily provoke like a huge amount of deeper thought within me. There's some of that, and it definitely like presents some ideas about, love and relationships and the other and those kind of elements, especially within the context of this 1950s society. But ultimately, the film doesn't really pull me in super deep into a very, very philosophical discussion like some of the other films that we've seen have. Some of the other films, I would say, in the upper echelon, because the base level of quality is very much there. It's a totally enjoyable film just to watch, and I'm glad that the second time around I gave it the chance. I gave it the time of day to actually pay attention to what was happening. Because the first time I saw it, I didn't do that. I was not a attentive viewer.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, actually, Timo, because I think one of the things that impressed me more about the film in my second viewing, even though I ended up having maybe more issues with it than my first on the whole, is that I did find a deeper level to The Shape of Water. Whereas I viewed it far more for its A-plot when I watched it before. I actually think that there's somewhat of an interesting, almost allegorical reading of the film, with Michael Shannon as this sort of higher society, white Christian American man with a suburban nuclear family after the status symbol of the Cadillac, and the corporate progression and the sort of intrinsic misogyny to his character and the sort of structures he operates within, against the, as you were saying, Timo, the other of a mute woman, a black woman, and literally and Tanner, an aquatic man. Right,
amphibious.
That's acceptable.
Sorry,
Aquatic man.
Yeah,
I didn't say fish man, as I was instructed not to before the episode began. But
Yes.
I think that GDT very cleverly structures who the protagonists and the antagonists are, and I think that in some of the scenes we get, particularly with Michael Shannon, that sort of contrast between identity is drawn in a way that I think is effective and adds more to the sort of the bones of this film that goes beyond just the brilliance of the aesthetic and the soundtrack and everything.
Yeah, it's interesting where this film chooses to lean on its thematic concepts, because they are there, they are pervasive throughout, you can very easily read into them. But, Timo, I can understand watching this and feeling like, from the perspective of someone who has been watching all these Best Picture winners, and for the vast majority of them, we nail home, this is what these themes mean, this is what the characters and the plot are feeding towards in terms of referencing social issues or whatever. It's all present in this film, but I would say, for one of the first times in our quest watching history, this film does not focus on those. We're so used to them being the main drive, and one of the main reasons the other films we've seen are so important, so highly revered. But I find it kind of refreshing in a way that while there is very solid thematic material there, it's not, I'm able to enjoy the film from both perspectives. It sits in a more interesting place in conversation in the legacy of Best Picture winners, because it's not say, hey, this is a mute woman and a black woman and a gay man, and they're the ones going against the system. It's not hammering that in, and of course it could, but I think the fact that that's all implicit, and as viewers we sort of understand, yeah, this is what he's going for, makes it more palatable and gives you a chance to focus on the subversion of monster movie tropes and things that we otherwise would not see at all in this level of film.
I think to jump off of that, actually, Tucker, because I think it's because of the nuance that the film operates on a steeper level with. I think that it's done a lot through nice shots. For instance, there's a great comedic moment. I love the entire, as we'll talk about the A-plot, I love the scene of them breaking the asset out of the Occam facility. But there's a great comedic moment of the Cadillac getting smashed, which is fun. But I think it also speaks to that sort of class commentary or gendered commentary, just societal commentary that the film is making, when then we see Michael Shannon still drives that Cadillac because of the symbol that it represents, even though the front end is caved in, right?
Sure.
I think that sort of notion of him trying to uphold his status and uphold his position in the sort of hierarchy of the military, and just suburbia.
Yeah.
It's effective because it is not overbearing, in my opinion.
I think Michael Shannon's character, Richard Strickland, has a number of those moments that really drive home this. I think Del Toro's sort of subversion of this idea of decency and status within white male America, especially in the 1960s. His whole thing, the thing about his fingers, which is gross on a surface level and great and just like good for the surprisingly gory detail that this movie goes into, but also on the thematic level that we're discussing here. That he is literally rotting, but still going through and trying to take be a family man and move up not the corporate ladder, the governmental ladder, I suppose. In all these ways.
Well, he's not really trying to be a family man. Let's be real.
No.
He's a crappy father and a very terrible husband.
Well, as people were in the 1960s, often.
Sure, especially if you're this racist and homophobic and everything.
Yeah.
Generally bad dude.
Yes.
I think we can move off of this point because we've kind of run into the ground. But I think the sort of the takeaway for me is that it is a really compelling narrative that has a thematic backdrop to it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Giles misinterprets what he's getting from the pie waiter, and that becomes a moment of homophobia and racism in the end. I think it situates the narrative. It doesn't become, this is not a film about classism or misogyny or racism or just general prejudice, but it's a film that's informed by that because it's mindful of the context that the narrative takes place in. So it's certainly not a message movie for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's an aware movie, which is sort of a level and a reading that I didn't get when I watched it the first time.
Sure. Well, I have a
You
question
just
for
didn't
you guys.
get it.
I have a question for you guys about this.
Okay.
Is Eliza, is she a fish? Excuse me. Sorry. Is she an amphibious woman? Is she like a lost amphibious woman that was washed up on the shore somewhere?
The implication is yes.
I think
but
so,
I think,
yeah.
I think the fact is that the world that they've created here and the sort of intertwinedness of historical realism and fantasy and monster tropes is so ambiguous. That is what makes this film very unique in my eyes and very refreshing. That there isn't... You get the implications throughout, and of course with the ending shot, which may or may not be real. It may be her dream. It may be Giles's dream or his picture of what happened. There's a lot of ambiguity there that ties back on a thematic level of her being an other and connecting to the asset in that way. But I like, as a monster nerd, as a superhero comics nerd, as all this stuff, sure. Yeah, she's a fish person. Great.
Hey, what now?
She has gills, okay? She has gills, so...
This is true. Or are they scars? That's the whole thing, you know?
My thing is that here's my opinion. I think that the romance between her and the asset is so compelling that by the end I just say fuck it, I want her to be alive. So if he did his force healing on her to give her gills, that's fine by me. I didn't really interpret the movie as her being a reincarnated fish person the entire time because I don't necessarily.
Oh my god.
Because I don't think it really fits. It's like, that is entirely speculative in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think what's better is you convinced me that this bestiality narrative really is compelling to the point where I want her to be a fish person so they can live together happily ever after, you know?
Sure.
To me...
Well, yeah, I would like to talk about the romance of this, because I think at its core we've called this, an aesthetic movie, a monster movie of sorts, but I think at its core, this is a romance movie above everything else. And
an atypical one.
Yeah, an atypical one for sure, but I think that's what makes it so special, is that it ties back into that thematic thing of Eliza, I almost keep forgetting her name every time. Eliza sees herself as the other, and of course the asset, Doug Jones's amphibious man, is very clearly the other to every other character in this film. And she has that really great sort of that speech that she gives to Giles or Giles. We flip-flopped on how to pronounce his name. But she has
I think it's Giles.
I think
It's Giles. I just watched the movie 3 hours ago.
Okay, Giles. We're gonna go with Giles. She gives that really great speech to Giles about like this fish amphibious man doesn't see me for what I lack. He sees me for what I am. And what that is just like for a protagonist that is a disabled person, I feel like that's a really powerful romantic theme to drive forward. Is to you fall in love with someone who is completely removed from human society and sees you exactly for what you are and not what you lack. While on the other hand, Strickland is making various creepy sexual advances towards Eliza, and he fetishizes what she isn't. He fetishizes her muteness. There's that really, again, another super creepy scene where he puts his rotting, disconnected fingers on his wife's mouth to like silence her while they're having sex.
I hate that.
Yeah, it's gross, and for a number of reasons, and it's effective, and lets us know, a very clear dichotomy of what GDT is saying is good and what is bad in this film. What is romantically good and what is romantically bad.
To me, the romance story of the film and almost like the A plot really is like fairy tale like. It's like this Beauty and the Beast kind of story that even in the way it establishes itself, it kind of I'm like let to be drawn into it because I'm like, okay, there's all this, fanciful stuff going on, but ultimately it's like just a story of, Eliza finding love in someone who is like equally lonely to her. There's that whole part where she's like, oh, he's truly alone. Like and she's definitely in that scene, I think, talking about how she kind of feels that same way, even though she doesn't say it outwardly. Her performance and the subtext of the dialogue in that scene indicates that. So I totally agree with the reading that the film is very romantic in a very strange and pretty like standard, not standard, but Del Toro-esque way.
He's created his own standard.
Yeah, of course.
I agree. I really love the romance because it is, while there is that great scene of dialogue, it is told non-verbally, and it really plays to the strengths of the film. Naturally, the cinematography and the score and everything are incredibly evocative in their incredibly weird but incredibly romantic sequences, like in the bathroom or whatever. And I really especially love when she teaches the asset basic sign language for egg and for things. But my one issue with the romance is where it begins, because I don't understand why she would at all want to give him an egg in the first place, right? Once I'm on board, I'm fine with it, but like the only thing she knows about this thing is like she touched its glass and it scared her and it ate a man's fingers off. And then she like, here's my lunch. Do you want to eat it? So
she's kind. That's like the whole thing about Eliza's character. Is she's a kind-hearted person.
Yeah, I get it. I just think that they don't do a great job of getting me on board for the romance. Once I'm captive on the train, I end up having Stockholm syndrome, and I'm happy to be there by the end of the ride. But I just don't think that it onboards me the way I want to be.
Well,
I think maybe how I read into something like this, and of course this is all speculation, but I feel like I see Eliza as a character who's obviously been at this kind of facility for a decade. She's been working this job. She's probably seen a lot of crazy shit, maybe not to this level, but the idea that she recognizes there's a living creature being held captive here, and she knows that there's a possibility, or I feel like there's a moment where she recognizes some sort of intelligence or humanity in it before she hands it an egg. Like, I can't remember exactly what the moment is, but I never felt that there was an unnatural decision on her part to, hey, I recognize humanity, I recognize intelligence, and as someone who is disjointed from humanity, attempting to build a connection there that others can't. I feel like that makes a lot of sense for her character. If it means that you have to create this background narrative about her, maybe that's not the best, but it was never an issue to me personally.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the other side character. We can circle back around to Eliza, but I think the side characters are also endlessly interesting in this film. because I this is also a bit of this is a segue into doing my first bit of trivia for this, is that Del Toro wrote extensive, like almost novel worths of backstory for all of these characters and gave them to the actors to read before they started shooting and rehearsals and stuff like that. And the actors varied on how seriously they took them. Apparently, Richard Jenkins completely ignored it and said the only thing that matters is what happens on screen. Whereas Michael Stuhlbarg said he read the backstory voraciously and found it helpful in his performance. And I think all of these characters are super interesting. Well, obviously Richard Jenkins didn't read his backstory, but if you think about it, he's this gay man in the 1960s who was let go of his job presumably because of his sexuality, and he's a struggling artist who has a drinking problem, and he lives next door to a mute woman who he's best friends with, and he has sort of this infatuation with this guy who works at a pie shop. And then you have Dmitri, as we come to learn his name is Michael Stuhlbarg, who is a secret Soviet spy embedded in this New Jersey, right? That's where this film takes place?
Baltimore.
Baltimore, sorry, thank you. This Baltimore military facility, who is really more concerned with like scientific study than he is with a nationalistic devotion to his country. Michael Shannon is just super. I don't know about his backstory being that interesting, but he's just super imposing, and I love Michael Shannon in this whole movie. You have Octavia Spencer, who is another friend of Eliza, who has this sort of rocky home life with a husband she doesn't really respect, and she kind of has to stand up for Eliza at work and such. And she's a very colorful character in her own right. She has quite a few funny lines about cleaning bathrooms and how men piss and stuff like that. But yeah, I think they're all very engaging, and coming off a film like Patton, which is severely lacking in the supporting cast department, the Shape of Water is such a refreshing fleshing out of all these characters.
I certainly agree. I think it's a great sign of that you have a really full and complete cast all around, because the amount of screen time that's devoted to each of these characters that you listed is a lot more balanced than you would expect. Of course, Eliza's the protagonist. Of course, she's the main character. But you get a lot of scenes of just Giles, him going to work, him working on the Jell-O thing, him in his own apartment or building his relationship with Eliza. The fact is that no matter who we're focusing on, whether it is Strickland at home or Bob, Dmitri dealing with the whole communism subplot, I'm always interested. I don't care who it is we're focusing on. I never feel like, oh, all right, I can't wait to get away from this character. I'm always interested in each of their narratives.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they all matter too. Which makes it so that the plot is it feels super connected. You have all these characters and you learn about them, and then things are planted, things are paid off.
Wow.
It's kind of like screenwriting 101, but sometimes films, even Best Pictures, totally fail to do it.
Yeah. Timo, that's actually exactly what I was going to say. I think the strength of the character speaks first to the strength of the plot, because it is so it's complicated. Effectively, there's this secret creature found in South America brought to this facility, but then the Russians are here and the American government wants it, and there are these people who are dispossessed by society. There's a lot going on, but there's a clarity to all of it, and the ways that it all intersects allows these characters to just make sense. Bob ultimately is not... He has two character traits. He's a spy and he likes science. But in the context of this web that GDT spins, I think they feel really rich and, as Timo was saying, important to what's happening. It's not an ensemble movie by any stretch, but it is a movie where everybody is integral to what happens. I don't really think you could tell a shorter version of this story. But I do think you could tell a longer one. And this is kind of my major issue with the film is the end of it. Sure. Whereas talking about the sort of tonal disjunction, I think it comes from the fact that the sort of sudden release of the asset, which is, of course, motivated by Michael Shannon, I think still feels too sudden. I got a call right when Michael Shannon really grossly sticks his finger through the bullet hole in Bob's mouth to drag him to the sand pit.
God.
Oh,
man.
which is where the film suddenly and quickly begins to unravel its narrative. That is only, it's less than 20 minutes away from the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pace ends up making the shift in tone, because it is a violent film throughout. Like, we see gore, we see the sort of undertones, right?
Yeah, we see a cat's head get eaten off.
Right, yeah, but I think there's a warmth to the cinematography there that we don't get in the darkness of those last 20 minutes. At the same time, the plot is moving so quickly. I think it trips over its own feet there a little bit, because I think about like Jaws, which in my mind is sort of a fair analog to make here, where I think that the dread of Jaws and the violence that Jaws is going to unleash in that third act against Quint and everybody is set up better. So when it happens, not only is there more time for it, but it feels more prepared. I think that the film ends too quickly, and it makes it feel too jarring, in my opinion.
Maybe it's that Strickland doesn't exactly like interact with our like emotional core of the film that much. And so while that we do feel some danger earlier in the film from him, because he's obviously the antagonist, it's at the end of the film, like the problems are kind of all solved when he shows up, when they've got the asset on the docks and they're going to release him. And you know, basically like I'm thinking in that moment, okay, if everything goes to shit, the dude just jumps in the water and then mission's complete. Even if like everything else goes horribly, like there's still a semblance of like a wrap up here. But the film, I do think, kind of lets itself meander a little bit and is not exactly like focused in those moments on the emotional core and trying to get like a cool action sequence. And it is. And I think the makeup and everything, you know, the production of the film sells it totally, but that the emotion of that last sequence is a little bit more disconnected than the rest of the film. Probably because the rest of the film is so like tightly knit in that emotional like character idea.
Yeah, it's a very interesting change at the end, and as you're sort of explaining your problems with it, I'm definitely starting to come around to it. I think it's just that the story, as Timo was saying, is so tightly knit and everything flows so naturally from one to the other, and you know exactly where everyone is at all times, that when you get to the end and you have to suddenly keep track of everyone at a much faster pace, it can become slightly overbearing and everything happening all at once, like literally within an hour or two of whatever in the film's time, 20 minutes in our film watching time, but it all happens very quickly. And I do think there could have been a better maybe dual narrative going on at the end that separates it a little bit and gives us a little more closure on both ends. But I don't think it weighs on the film enough, because it does, as Timo's saying, give us the semblance and the actuality of wrapping up all these narratives. There's not really any plot points that are left hanging. And as I said at the beginning, I do feel like there is a good enough sort of drip, drip, drip ticking of the clock. This is coming, and we know it has to come to a head, that I agree with you, but I guess I don't. It didn't damage my enjoyment of the film that much.
Yeah, sure. Now, Timo brought up something that sort of reminded me that there's one member of the cast who we've not talked about or really complimented anyway, and that is Doug Jones,
the amphibious Aquaman.
The asset, the amphibian
the
man.
The Aquaman, that's what they call him.
The creature from the Black Lagoon, whatever you want to call him. He does a fantastic job.
Don't call him late for dinner.
Yeah, exactly. A 1960s joke there from Tucker, a little matching the era a little bit. But no, he does a fantastic job. Apparently it took him 3 hours to get into all the makeup and prosthetics for this, which according to him is one of the shortest bouts that he's had to do for a GDT film. Of course, he's the eyeball in the hand man from Pan's Labyrinth and Abe Sapien in Hellboy.
And Doug Jones consistently plays tall, lanky alien figures in rubber suits. That's like his typecast, and he's really good at it.
And he is really good at it. I mean, the physicality of creating such an iconic. This film could easily just buzz by on a low tier, having like the novelty of having a fishman in a romance with a human woman in this. But no, Doug Jones really puts a physicality into the asset, the amphibious man, where I've kind of noticed he like leads with his hips as he walks around, and sometimes he's scrambling around on the ground, and the noises that he makes and the facial expressions when he like hisses or whatever, or when he's eating the head off of a cat. It's all just really standout stuff that makes that elevates every scene that has the amphibious man in it. But I don't know, was there anything that you guys wanted to say about his performance?
Well, it's a
I gotta be
combination. Oh, go ahead, Abram.
I gotta be honest, I didn't find his performance particularly remarkable, frankly. I think he does the job he set out to do. I think what captivates me is sort of the ethos of the character and the costuming. I think the costuming is wonderful. I love his design. I suppose the way he moves is impressive, but I think what's more impressive is the ways that people move around him. The ways, like seeing Eliza hug him, things like that. Those are the sort of interactions that compel me more than just the way he moves, which I suppose does feed into the costuming and create a sense of this guy being real. But I suppose the fact that the performance camouflages itself is to its benefit.
Yeah.
But it didn't strike me as remarkable, I suppose.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's remarkable to me about the whole thing is what I was going to say about the combination of all the different crafts that go into making the asset like feel very real in that not only does he move around like a fish, he sounds like a fish, and like the costume as well as all the visual effects that go on top of the costume. This film, I think, has a lot of VFX work, and man, you don't notice any of it. Like, it's all hidden and it's all motivated. And so, for me at least, my amazement at the character really comes from this like multidisciplinary, all these different departments in the film coming together to build this one thing, and they all have to work really well, and they all do. He's kind of a delight to see on screen. He's comedic at times and he's sad at times, and you can read into the character, even though the rubber suit doesn't really let like a lot of like traditional acting shine through. But the way he blinks, it's all that crazy stuff, and yeah, I think there's a lot to like about the character, even beyond Doug Jones's performance.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I agree with Abram actually on this one is that Doug Jones as the asset is great because it carries the most interesting aspect of the film, which is the fact that we have an amphibious man in the main role, or not the main role, but you get what I'm saying, the focus. But I think the reason that he camouflages so well, as Abram was saying, is because the asset is the part of the movie that blends in the strongest with the aesthetic that's created. When you get the film opening on soft score and narration and underwater visuals, and you are instantly transported to this is not our world, and things are going to have this sort of otherworldly sheen to it, and it's always kind of moist outside, and
it's always raining in Baltimore.
Yes, I want to take this opportunity to transition to some of the elements of the aesthetic that I think do make this film one of the strongest that we've seen visually, which is especially the lighting. Combined with the set design. The fact that almost every light in this film is some sort of hue of green and blue is fantastic, and such an amazing form of consistency that you don't usually get. And it bathes things in this underwaterish light, even if they're on dry land on a street or at night or whatever. There's a consistency to that it doesn't feel jarring when the movie opens on things floating underwater. Obviously, that's not a real sequence, but it's a sort of a fairy tale like, dreamlike. Yeah. But then we get them sitting in a pie bar, which is weird to say, but a pie bar that also sort of has this underwater feel because it's rimmed by blue and green neon light, and I think that's fantastic.
Beyond just like the lighting and stuff, I think the film's kind of tongue in cheek in its color use. Like the pies are like almost like
god awful
like
green.
They're like uranium
green.
They're uranium green, and when what's his name, the artist, I can't remember, Giles is trying to sell his advertisement. The guy's like, no, we can't have red Jello. We need green Jello. I think it's like
green is the future.
Green is the future, and so there's a little bit more to that in like the color theory of the film.
Yes,
that it kind of acknowledges, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys all brought up the production of this film. This film, of course, did win Best Production Design at the Oscars this year. It also won. GDT won for Best Director. I think well deserved. He's a very talented director, and if not for this film, deserved to be recognized for his other work. This obviously won Best Picture. Best Score for Alexandra Desplat. Is that how you do? Is that how you?
I think it's
pronounce
just
it?
Alexander.
Okay, Alexandra Desplat.
Yeah.
It was nominated for actress in a leading role for Sally Hawkins, actor in a supporting role for Richard Jenkins, actress in a supporting role for Octavia Spencer, best original screenplay nomination, cinematography nomination, costume design nomination. Surprised it didn't win that. I wonder what did win that year. Sound
Probably
editing.
Darkest Hour or some stupid shit like that.
Oh
frankly.
yeah, because
Frankly.
Gary Oldman. Yeah, Gary Oldman being Winston Churchill is way more impressive than the fantastic makeup and special effects on Doug Jones in this. I hate the Academy. Nominated for Best Sound Editing, Sound Mixing, and Film Editing.
That is a slight and a half of nominations and
It is.
wins.
Yeah.
I think there's one clearly missing, though, which is a nomination for Michael Shannon, because we talked about his character, but I think his performance is equally notable. He has. I'm a Michael Shannon enjoyer in general. I think he's a great Zod, but I also think he's so commanding here.
He is.
He's a man. He is a
He's a great
wide-eyed-
Zod corpse in BVS.
He's a wide-eyed gentleman, and I think that really helps him when he's really getting up close. And his face, what he can do with his face, I think, is quite engaging. But also the way he pops in the pieces of candy, like he takes what is kind of a fairly standard archetype and gives it a lot of life that it wouldn't have otherwise had. That I think only somebody of Michael Shannon's status really could. So
Yeah. He really embodies the other side of that, the bigotry and of the 1960s America that ties into the themes that we were talking about at the beginning. Speaking of that, I did want to bring up one thing that I didn't get a chance to drop in there. I think that theme really comes to fruition, and sort of the uselessness of Strickland's sort of pursuit of this platonic ideal of the 1960s American man. When in that conversation with the general in his office right before he goes on his whole tirade, basically the conceit of that conversation, the general says this sort of decency that you try to put on and wear as like you trying to be the perfect ideal American man, that's useless. It's bullshit. It doesn't matter. The only decency that really matters to the system in which you live, the American government, the American military, is to not fuck up, is exactly what the general says. You are to be useful and nothing else. You don't have to be visually appealing or like live up to these standards that we say. You just have to be useful. And it really dehumanizes, it really gets to the heart of that dehumanization that is key to that sort of those 1960s ideals and reinforces the humanizing elements of the relationship between Eliza and the amphibious man.
I really like that sequence, Tanner. My only thing about it is I wish that I like that the theme of like decency and the decency of the white man in the 50s and 60s is brought up a little bit more beforehand so that I can like feel it develop. Because when it happens, I'm like, oh, okay, this is like a thing that this is driving this character and this is a piece of like thematic material. But it's like we're towards the end of the film and I'm like, this is like the first time that, the film doesn't have to be explicit, like, oh, I'm a decent guy, but like I would have wished for maybe a little bit more thematic clarity from in that regard. Could have been just a line or two towards the beginning that sets up that this is a goal of this character.
I think it's set up pretty like casually and just like lines that he says. He's just casually throwing out racist remarks towards Eliza and what's Octavia Spencer's character's name? I forget. I'm sorry. Zelda, thank you.
Yes.
And he said he talks about things like we're made in the image of God, but not that thing and stuff. I think he has those lines which are very well delivered by Michael Shannon. That really drive home that this is this guy's ideal, and he wants to get out. He wants to move to a real city, not live in Baltimore.
Well, can you blame him? I think it's Baltimore as a joke.
I think the point of that comment was that I think Baltimore has always been a predominantly black city. So
didn't know that. My bad.
Yeah.
I think that the thing is the film on a thematic level tends to operate either really subtly or really overtly. Because we talk about the scene where it's cleverly woven into the narrative of Eliza making sure that Giles is actually listening to her, repeating back what she's signing. But that's one thematic statement about the romance, and then the conversation that we were just talking about is the second about who Michael Shannon is, or the system he's working within. So for me, it's neither here nor there that it gets that overt at times, because I agree with Tanner that I think it's woven nicely throughout, but it could perhaps stand to be a little bit less heavy-handed in those two scenes in particular.
I think the reason why I think that scene works so well, and while it's not one of my favorite moments of the movie, and I'm not going to praise it to the ends of the earth, but I do think there has to be that breaking moment of someone obviously above Michael Shannon in power for essentially the first time in the film, seeing him be put in his place. He's been commanding Bob and Zelda and Eliza throughout the entire film, and finally someone's like, no, these things that you very so clearly hold dear are just useless, and you're putting on this facade for fucking nothing. And obviously, that's what fuels him to snap and to be like, okay, if I need to be useful and get the asset back, I will stop at fucking nothing, even at the cost of my own physical health and the lives of others, to get this done. And that's what tumbles us into that final act. I think there has to be that sort of punch on his character to get him going. A catalyst, if you will. That's a big boy word.
Okay.
We haven't.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I do have one more thing. If we can go back to Eliza's character, because we haven't really talked about how much her being like a mute plays into the film. And I recently watched a over 100 years old silent film in which the main character is a mute. And let me just say, I vastly prefer The Shape of Water and the way that it deals with mute characters. I think it's expertly like written how not only is like Eliza's muteness very important to the plot and very important to her character, but it's shown in a way and it's presented in a way that isn't like overbearing in like, oh, we have to read subtitles all the time. Like that's dumb. I think that that would have been fine. But like with that scene with earlier where she's like, you have to repeat what I'm signing, like or make sure you're listening to me. That's like twofold. It's working to support the characters, but it's also working to support our understanding of it. And when there are text used to show what's happening on screen, it's very subtle. It's like a couple words here and there. And
it's also placed differently in the frame sometimes, which I think helps those moments stand out, because you're not used to text showing up in the middle of the screen almost ever in a film. But when she goes on that moment in the hallway and says, if we don't do anything, then we aren't human either. And the screens are in the middle, or fucking the text is in the middle of the screen. It makes your eyes focus on. You're like, oh, okay, that's what this means, and I think it works really well. And also, it's very unique. I've never seen that happen before.
To me, what's going on there is that's where like the action is. You're already looking there. And so they're just like, okay, where are we looking in this frame? Just put it right there, because I don't know. You can make the complaint about subtitles being that I have to look down at the bottom and then I have to look back up and you're missing out. Whatever. That's not a great argument to get into.
Put the 1-inch barrier in the middle of the screen, Bong Joon-ho.
to talk about Eliza's Sally Hawkins' performance a little bit more, I think that she's, obviously she's very powerful in scenes like that, but she's also funny. Like she has those little smirks whenever like she's talking to Zelda, especially when she talks about the amphibious man's penis, which is a scene that I love. But she has this smirk on her face that's just so funny and endearing. Apparently, Sally Hawkins studied like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton to sort of really understand this physicality that comes with being not being able to verbalize on the screen. And I think it pays off. I think she really did give Frances McDormand a run for her money. Frances McDormand won Best Actress in 2017.
3 Billboards.
Great Billboards. Yeah.
This is a better movie though, and frankly, I think she's the better performance, because the amount of nuance throughout her character in her characterization, but also just the performance of her physicality, of how charming she is, and so much of her movements, of little adding little dances and flourishes to her movement, and looking over her shoulder and doing all these things that you don't usually see out of this level of character, the stereotype of a character. She's a very charming person. She's a likable protagonist, and the emotion that she's able to portray on her face and through her physical signing, I think, is a great addition to this character that that allows her to give such a range of emotions.
Okay. I sense we are unfortunately on a tight timetable for this episode, so I just want to rattle off my last few things. Some trivia, some thoughts on the film, but here we go. We're gonna go lightning round here. I really love Dmitry or Bob Michael Stuhlbarg's whole line about how they don't need the Soviets to understand. They just need the Americans to not understand. I think someone says that to him, and I think that also ties into the idea of the Soviet Union and the Cold War era, that being the other and the Americans, which we talked about.
Sci-fi films in the 50s cannot be about anything other than communism versus capitalism under the hood.
Of course. That black and white dance sequence, I thought was really great. Doug Jones, a great physical performance. He has to dance around in that fishman suit, which is great. He does a great job there. And then some trivia here a second. Apparently, Guillermo del Toro approached Sally Hawkins for this film at the 2014 Golden Globes, and this is what he said. He said he was pitching this film to her, and he said, "I was drunk, and it's not a movie that makes you sound less drunk when you describe it."
I can imagine, yeah.
We have another quote from Del Toro here about where his original idea for this film came from, and it was The Creature from the Black Lagoon, as Abram was insisting before we started recording. He said, "I thought it would be great if the creature and Julie Adams, who plays Kay Adams in the film, would end up living together. I was 6 and I didn't know better, but now I'm 53 and I still don't know better because I made the movie."
And I think it's a really interesting concept of this being a very personal film to Guillermo del Toro. He is someone who, having listened to interviews with him and knowing a little bit about his history, he's someone who relates very, very tightly to monster characters, and that's why he creates something like a Hellboy or Pan's Labyrinth that is about this mysticism, about the creepiness and finding beauty in creepiness and stuff like that. And the idea of him watching the entirety of The Creature from the Black Lagoon and thinking that it's a romance movie, and then being a filmmaker 50 years later and be like, well, okay, if that movie doesn't exist, I'll just make it myself. I've literally been thinking that this is a good idea since I was 6.
Yeah.
And there's a childlike wonder to this whole thing.
I agree.
Which I think is fantastic.
And I do have one final joke. Oh, sorry, Tucker. Did you want to finish there?
I have one thing that I want to say about the set design that I wanted to bring up when we're talking about the lighting, but is the sort of aquatic nature of the whole ambiance of the film is heightened by a few small details. There's something about the set design has some sort of element of underwater design in the framing of the room or something like that, but also Eliza's room is built to look like a fish tank. There's those big windows and it's sort of green and rainy outside that makes it feel like she's in this aquatic environment. I think is really cool.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I really did not convey that first one. I can't remember what it was actually.
It sounds interesting. But my final joke piece of trivia.
Let me throw this in there
quickly.
While Tanner's reading that out, punch in your numbers so we can hit that
great.
score.
Great
Good
plan.
idea. Good idea. Okay. The last one is apparently Seth Rogen met Guillermo del Toro at a party one year and told him that if we had seen The Fishman's Penis, it would have been the best movie of the year. And apparently Guillermo del Toro disagreed.
Well, I'm going to agree
GDT
with...
was right.
Yeah, GDT was very right.
He was right.
Okay, let's figure out where it goes. I've got mine.
I have mine.
3,
me too.
2, 1.
Huh?
And
all right.
A square even number for the average score. The average score being 9.0. Point breakdown starting from the bottom. I gave it an 8.3, followed by Tanner and Abram tied at 8.9 with Tucker at a 9.8. So, could have probably seen that coming. But a 9.0 is going to place the film right
in a problematic spot.
A problematic spot because it's tied with American Beauty for place number 10. What do we say?
Now, is there any way I can squeeze this to be above?
I'm gonna.
I
say
love
no
American
for
Beauty,
me.
but
I'm going to say above too. That's my vote.
Uh-oh.
I love how this always falls on Tanner. God, that makes me so happy.
Well, you know that I really, really loved the film American Beauty. I talked about that on the most recent episode. So I'm gonna have to say above. I'm gonna have to say American Beauty above The Shape of Water.
Yes.
What's the sort of tie-breaking rule that we go to here, Timo? We haven't had to do this for a while.
Wait.
No,
I don't
there's
think there is a
miscommunication.
tie. There is
Oh,
no
there's
tie.
not a tie? Oh, okay.
No, 3 of us wanted above.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Shape of Water
Well, there it
above.
goes.
Well, never
But
mind.
it
Wait,
doesn't-
wait.
Wait.
I want American Beauty higher.
So do I.
I want Shape of Water higher.
I want Shape of Water higher.
That's what I was
yes.
talking about.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
I think I can be convinced to put American Beauty, to keep American Beauty in its spot and slot Shape of Water, given that I was the one who had
Okay.
the lowest score. So, yeah, I think that they're both very good films. It's kind of hard for me to. I definitely have. We are short on
We
time.
leave it to
so
the viewer?
We could leave it to the viewer. We could.
In our darkest hour, we leave it to Dan's and John tour.
You know what?
I'm
Should we
okay
do
with
it?
that.
We'll hash it out in the comments. American Beauty versus The Shape of Water. Who wins? Which is the better movie? Let us know in the comments. We'll settle it next week.
We will settle it next week. As we talk about next week, we got to figure out what film we're going to be talking about next week.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think it's time to hit that spin wheel before we get out of here. Tanner, are you ready?
Already. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
Is it on wheel?
Got it. Is it on wheel? It's on the wheel. It's right there.
It's on the
Always on
wheel.
wheel.
It's right there. This number is 26. So out of 32
Interesting.
films that we could have gotten, we're going to be heading back into the past again. Tucker, what is
Yeah,
it?
we're gonna be hopping back to the year of 1941. We're watching a movie starring Maureen O'Hara and Walter Pidgeon, directed by John Ford. How Green Was My Valley?
How Green
I love
Was
this
My
movie.
Valley? Okay, I'm
Clocking
really
in at an hour 58, so not ridiculous for an older movie. I'm interested to see what John Ford does for a Best Picture winner.
My grandparents showed me this movie.
Oh, you've actually seen it?
No, I'm fucking with you. I've never heard of this. This can't be a real title.
This sounds vaguely sexual, if you ask me.
This is a film that I've seen is very similar to John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath, but it's a little different. I studied it briefly in film history, but I haven't seen it yet. So I've got the context, but not the actual viewing about this film. So I'm excited
Tucker-
to watch it and talk about it.
How long is this movie?
I just
1 hour
said
58.
an hour 58 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, I missed it. My bad. But that's manageable. And you know what? We're gonna watch this movie.
We're gonna watch it.
No promises on what we think of it.
I've heard this film is about unions, so we'll see how applicable it is to the modern day and everything going on in our current time and date. Well, we're going to be talking about How Green Is My Valley next time. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, vote in the comments. Which film do you think should go higher on the list? I don't want to hear which film you think is the better. It's not about better film. It's about list ranking. Do you want The Shape of
Quester
Water or American Beauty to go on top? Let us know in the comments, and we will let you know the results next week. All right, we'll see you then. Peace.